Good afternoon. Calling to order the Affordable Housing Trust meeting on May 31st. And it looks like the first order of business is an approval of minutes from our January 19th meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? Or changes? All in favor? Opposed?
I'm gonna abstain since I wasn't there.
So I'm going to say under Robert Rules of Order, you don't actually need to abstain. I'll just let you know.
Okay.
As long as you've read them and they make sense, you are allowed to vote for future reference. You actually don't even need to vote. You could just put them on file.
Okay.
But we will have declared it a vote and unanimously passed. The next item of business is our status of our housing trust fund. I'm actually wondering, do we have? We have Karen, do we have Lee?
Yes.
There, I can't see you. Good. Okay. Heidi's there. I see Heidi where Lee is. All right. The first order, the next item is the status of the Housing Trust Fund. And I can see.
So, Madam Chair, we had talked at your last meeting about putting it in an order showing the deposits and expenditures. Since we haven't spent anything, this is more of just a summary of each fiscal year that we've had the fund. And generally speaking, the fees that we deposit are those annual monitoring fees that we have for some of the projects. The new projects and big projects are monitored by the state and we don't get fees for those, but they're modest fees for the Wingate project, Needham Place and Hamilton Highlands. And then we also, on occasion, will receive fees because we are the overseer of ownership units, and we get a very small fee when they convey. So but it's very rare, Karen, I think you'll agree, there's very rare transfer in these units, the ownership units, is that fair to say? You're muted, Karen.
Not looking.
Sorry about that. I'm on mute. Yeah, it is very rare. We get more frequent requests for refinancing. We have to go through a protocol for that, but resales don't happen very often.
So the units that we oversee for that purpose are Junction Place, High Cliff Estates, which is St. Mary's, Brown Whitney, which is Garden Street, and High Rock. So,
Yes.
So to date, we are not spending from the Housing Trust. The programs that we have run have been direct warrant articles from town meeting.
Madam Chair, just the interest earned, I see it was in the 200s and now it's in the 30s. Is that just a product of the fund it's in, do we know, or the vehicle, or it's just interest rates have decreased? Do we know why that's such a different?
I'm sure it's interest rates, but I can.
If you could,
I'm happy to
it's
get
just
it,
such a substantial difference.
And are these all in different funds? It's not in a single fund? I think that's the other
Oh,
question.
they're all invested by the treasurer. What she can invest this particular trust in, I can find out.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Because it does appear that each one is in its own something, which.
They are not segregated for the purposes of investment. They're segregated for the purpose of you seeing how the funds were credited at each fiscal year.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on the fund? Okay. The next item is an update on the small grant program, the small repair grant program.
Do you want to take that?
Can I ask a question about the housing inventory first, which doesn't seem to be on the list of agenda items? Part of what I wondered with the housing inventory is at what point does this get updated to reflect Census 2020 housing units?
That's a great question. We were talking about that just last week. Karen, do you want to talk about that? Did you hear the question, Karen?
Yes. It goes into kind of discussion on where we are with the housing plan working group too. We have updated figures and we based on the 2020 census, and the total denominator housing units is now 11,891 units. The total number of SHI units went from 1,410 units to 1,394 because they took out the 1180, 16 units, 1180 Great Plain Avenue, the 40B that was in litigation. And that comes out to, I think it goes down to from 11.86% to, or 12.86% to, or 12.76% to 11.86%. So we still have a significant cushion above the 10%. But in the 2010 census figures, there were 75 seasonal or occasional units. In the 2020 census figures, not only did we have significant housing growth in numbers, but there were no seasonal or occasional units. So the year-round housing figure that DHCD will use is the same as the total number of housing units.
Do we expect DHCD to start using that number next year, or when will they start using it?
I was surprised that they had not updated the percentage. We just got a biennial report. Every 2 years, DHCD sends out to each community the list of SHI units for the community to review and to get back to them with any changes. And I was surprised that they were still using the 2010 11,047 total housing, year-round housing units figures. I assume that at some point soon, they'll go through the 2020 census estimates and make those changes, corrections for each community across the state. But we've already done those calculations, so we know that the percentage has gone down.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, the small repair grant program, an update on that. We had an update in our packet. Is there something additional you would like to cover, or can we open up for questions?
I think questions is fine.
I was just wanting to double check one item when I looked at multiple documents. The summary here is a little bit, I think, confusing. I think I understand that eligible applicants have to be 60 years or older or have a disability and an income that's below 80% of the area median income. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Also, there is another requirement, which is that we add 2% of the difference between the total assessed value of their home and any outstanding mortgage liens to the income to determine eligibility under that 80% AMI threshold.
Yep.
We are very excited that town meeting approved another $50,000 for the program and have been updating figures and are ready to launch another round of the program, working with Cindy Gonzalez on outreach, and with your go-ahead to begin kind of outreach and that round, we'll get going on marketing, and we have a tentative due date for the applications of July 8th. All the awards be made no later than July 31st. Typically, there are 2 rounds per year.
Okay.
So July 8th is what, 5 weeks away? Is it worth, I know there's a second round happening at the end. What is it, usually November or something, but would it be worth adding a second deadline even in the summer, one on July 8th, one August 8th? Does that make any sense? Does that give more time, or is it because we have the second one already in November? Do you think we're okay?
It's worked in the past pretty well when we've done the same kind of schedule in the other 2 allocations, and it's worked pretty well. I mean, if we feel that there is some kind of issue with timing, we can always grant an extension.
Okay, great.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Borelli.
So I'm just unclear, I guess, on the supply and the demand. So I know it says that it was encumbered, 100%, and we had people back out in one move. But is there a waiting? It just, to me, are we hitting it right on the head to get to that amount? Is there a waiting list? It just seems that to be able to hit the number, I think 1 or 2 years in a row, whatever it's been, would be incredible. So I guess my question is, are there other people that need the assistance as we keep moving forward? And do we have a waiting list? So if people do drop out, then we can reapproach with the unencumbered funds.
We don't have a waiting list. I have numbers of people who are interested in applying, and I've told them that I will send them an application as soon as we get the go-ahead to launch this next round. I can say that in the past, we've pretty much committed the funding available. There has been numbers of people who fall out of eligibility, mostly because of income. For example, if income was a higher, or if we didn't have that 2% rule, there would have been more people who were determined eligible, and we would have probably done a waiting list, and we would have had to triage some of those applicants. But that has not happened thus far, because the 2022 HUD income limits have gone up much higher. We're, at least in this first round, going to see how that affects eligibility, and whether we're still getting numbers of people to commit at least half of the $50,000 in this first funding round. And if we have to make some changes, we can do that in the second funding round. And we think that that's a reasonable plan.
Right, and just, Madam Chair, to follow up, I guess, yes, and what I would just suggest, or as we move forward, if there is a waiting list or a list, just to get an idea of how many people really would like to use this fund, because they might have just gotten cut off and said, no, I'm sorry, the dates moved, we've already at capacity. I just want to, as we go forward, make sure that we have some type of list to see what the demand is, because I'm unclear what the demand. Clearly, it's great, and we're doing a great job of getting the word out. I just want to make sure that there are not more people that, so when we go to town meeting, we can tell them, you know what, this is the number, or it should be more, it should be less.
Madam Chair, one thing that we had talked about more than a year ago was whether we should change the income limits or change the amount of the home value that was allocated. But we did get enough people who, there was some worry at the beginning because many people were over income, but we were able to fully subscribe. So we're not making that recommendation yet until that happens again.
Sure.
So, yeah, but we can keep, and Karen does, and we can do a report of who applied and whether, how many people were denied because of income, and if anybody was denied because we didn't have any money left, but I don't think there were.
Okay.
No.
Okay, any other questions? All right, the home consortium updates, fair housing, testing and parking study.
So I'm going to kind of give a summary of this too, very briefly. We, as part of the West Metro Home Consortium, issued a request for proposals for an entity to undertake testing to determine if property managers of multifamily rental properties were in any way discriminating against applicants. We didn't receive any response to the RFP. The entity or entities that we expected would be would submit proposals had just agreed to a very large state contract to do this work. So we didn't receive a response, but we're hopeful that they might have the capacity next year to help us out, and we would reissue the RFP then. So it's not completely dead, but it's certainly delayed. On the parking study, as you recall, the West Metro Housing Consortium, in cooperation with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, embarked on a study to actually count the number of occupied parking spaces during a weeknight to compare that with the zoning requirements for parking, and to really get a better grasp on utilization rates and whether zoning is needs to be tweaked in some way. And it would be to cross all 13 jurisdictions in the consortium. We have 3 projects that are going to be studied as part of this project. Katie has found some volunteers that are willing to go out in the wee hours to actually count cars, which will be likely to happen tomorrow between midnight and 2 o'clock. And then to report back to us and to the Home Consortium. And then MAPC will be compiling all that data into a report, which will be, I think, very much of interest to the Needham Planning Board and others in the community.
We're just talking about the issue of how much parking is really required in zoning and how much is being used, so this would be really useful. If I mean, is it the Kendrick, Modera, and Charles River Landing that they're doing?
No, it's Stephen Palmer, the Kendrick, and Charles River Landing.
Okay,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yep, it will be good to see that.
Yeah.
Any questions related to this? So Karen, as I understood, you're hoping that a year from now, we may come back on the fair housing testing portion of this work?
Well, it certainly has been discussed at the Home Consortium that there was the possibility of being able to reissue the RFP and to work with an entity next year on a testing protocol. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it will happen again. But it's
Okay.
at this point, it's not under active discussion.
All right. Any other questions? All right, the next item on the agenda is the status of the housing plan working group. That I think we do have a schedule. At least that says a part of that.
Lee, is that you or Karen who are doing that one?
Yes, we have given you a timeline with kind of major milestones and also a summary of the work that the Housing Plan Working Group has been involved with to date and where we're headed. You know, a pretty major concern was to kind of cast a broad net and to do some significant community outreach activities to get input from residents and local leaders on a variety of questions related to the people's perceptions and priorities for actions that the town should take to better promote housing, affordability, diversity, whatever. So we did do a public education and listening session in January. We held a community housing workshop in March where there were breakout group discussions. And then the groups reconvened and presented their top 6 priority actions following their discussions that were then compiled into a list, and participants were then polled by email to get their top suggestions. So we have information on that, and we have also issued a community housing survey, hoping to get at more people who might not have had the time or interest to attend meetings, but with a very quick survey would want to provide some input into the process. And we've got about 232 responses, and we've put together a report that summarizes those results. You know, other important components of the planning process has been that a member suggested that the members of the working group break into subgroups, focusing on particular topics, and then really provide much more input into the housing plan actions. And the 3 groups are housing development preservation, zoning, and capacity building. And they've been working away, and we expect that they're going to be providing reports on their work in our June meeting. And clearly the results from this outreach that we've done is useful information for their particular work. We also drafted a housing needs assessment Initially, the 2020, not all of the 2020 census information was available, so we had to rely on 2019 census information, and we subsequently updated it when the 2020 data became available in March. And that was really meant to provide information from a number of sources on demographic, economic, housing characteristics that then become the context for establishing priority housing needs and ultimately the specific actions to address those needs. Particular importance in the deliberations has been the MBTA community guidelines, and zoning subgroup is reviewing that topic. I think Katie is going to review that timeline later in this meeting. Another kind of real focus of interest in the working group is the NHA's, the Housing Authority's Preservation and Modernization Initiative. And this next meeting, not only are we getting reports from the various subgroups, but the working group has invited Reg Foster, the chair of the Housing Authority, to provide a summary of their current work and bring everybody up to date on that. And then our last meeting, there was I think a very productive discussion about housing goals, revisiting those goals that were in the 2007 plan, and then determining that they should be converted into what's called guiding principles, and really went through, I think, a new list that is much more attuned to where we are time-wise. That'll be incorporated in the plan. And then there'll be further discussions about more quantitative, shorter and longer term production goals in the July meeting of the working group that's planned. And then with the work of the subgroups and over the summer, we'll be in the process of actually drafting the next sections of the housing plan, most importantly, the strategic action plan. We'll be holding another community-wide forum in late September to present the draft. And then based on that input, to finalize the plan sometime in October. That's kind of in a nutshell, kind of where we've been and where we're headed.
Any questions?
Madam Chair, just, I guess a comment and question. I just would like, as we move forward, we're gonna collect as much data as we can from people and hearings and whatnot, but I'm just looking at the statistics that are given, and I know it's limited with 32 respondents and then the top, or the 6 items. But when you take 32 and then you have, 30% of those respondents like one, I just want to be careful when we put numbers together, although they're accurate, just relying too much on such a small data set. So I think it's going to be very important as we get into the community and get input back. And I know you've done a great job of publicizing and trying to get people together with ideas, but I just don't want to, I think sometimes when you put numbers together and people have a tendency to kind of keep relying on those. So just kind of taking this with a grain of salt, but I understand the intent of it. And then my question is, I know in our past discussions, affordable renting has been kind of the priority in rentals, and I know that's been in those documents. And I'm just curious, is the committee looking more of an ownership? Has that not really been decided yet? Or what is the guiding principle of rental versus?
Well, we're going to discuss some of that during our July meeting. Given that almost all state subsidies are for rental development, and given the high cost of land, it is very hard to go to any real scale for ownership. So typically ownership percentages as far as total production goals are smaller. But all of this is still yet to be determined by the working group.
Thank you.
I just add a comment. I'd love to echo what you said about representation in the numbers. I was looking at the results from the community housing survey as well. I think you said it was about 230 responses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, which is great. That's more representative, but I'm looking here and we have nearly 90% of respondents of those 230 own a single family home, and more than half of them have been in Needham for more than 20 years. So again, just to sort of add to your point, I think it's important to recognize that we might not be getting every voice in this, at least yet. So I'd love to make sure that I think the results are great and it's a really good start, but I'd love to make sure that we include a lot of different perspectives as well, and make sure that those are getting,
Yeah.
appropriate.
I can say that the working group is very cognizant of this. That certainly it's useful to try to get as much response as possible, but they are really aware of the results vis-a-vis the demographic. And so these, just for your own information.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do we have this summary somewhere electronically?
Yes.
Okay, I couldn't find it again.
There were
So,
two emails. I can send them to you again.
so maybe one didn't go to my personal account, which is what I searched in. That could be my problem here. Okay. So I am curious, in terms of the list that we use for outreach on the community housing survey. I mean, I remember from taking the survey that I had some thoughts about how its construction was set up, but we'll ignore that for the time being and just think about outreach. What did we take advantage of the town's survey list as a way to try to reach people with this survey?
Do you mean
Question number one,
do you mean the micro polling list?
the
I
micro
believe we
polling
did,
list.
Yeah, I can double check with them, but I believe we did.
Okay, because I don't know that I saw it that way, but I wondered if it went out that way in some other way. And I'm also wondering if we took advantage of schools as a way, thinking about Avery's point, with who had responded. Did it go out through the school network in some way?
Yes, it did. It went to, Cindy has connection to the principals, each principal's newsletter. So it went out that way, as well as lots of other ways, but directly to the schools, that was the primary conduit.
Well, we'll see what else we can get back from that. I'll look forward to looking for the results. Any other questions related to this? So when you get to the next stage, I'm looking draft strategic action plan. Will you be coming back to this group or to the select board with a chance to understand what's in that plan before a community meeting? Or how are you thinking about that?
I think that, I don't think there's been any kind of final determination about that. Certainly your recommendations would be great on timing. Lee, is there something you want to add on
Yeah,
that?
we didn't have that formally structured into the schedule, Mary Ann, but it's, we hadn't really thought about that. So certainly if you think it would be helpful, we could look at doing something after that, of reporting back to the select board before the full presentation to the community.
I think that might be
Yeah, I
helpful. What
think
do
that-
other people think?
I actually thought that had been mentioned at the meeting, both talking to select board and possibly even FinCom.
This is,
Yeah.
this is a planning board working group, right? Under
It is
the-
a
so they
planning
have to
board working
report, yeah,
group.
back to the planning board, and then I'd love to hear what they have to say, that would be important.
I just think it would be helpful before it goes out, maybe
Yeah.
to the full community, to have a chance to check in. Any other questions from folks?
Yes, ma'am.
Go
On the
ahead.
priorities list, items 5 and 6, are those not priorities? Basically less than a third of interest, or were there other options of less and were locked off, or these? Are they being pursued actively?
No, these are just the, there was a long list of actions, and these were the ones that were most often voted on as priorities by the respondents. So that's basically where we are now.
Right. It's
There are
just-
many, there are others that were listed that will still be in consideration. It's not going to be just, we just are offering this as an example of the top 6 that seem to have the most kind of preference, but
Yeah.
there'll be more that will be part of the plan.
Yeah, no, it seems like there's a lot of excitement of options 1 and 2, or priorities 1 and 2. And then it does seem to drop off. That's fine. I just was curious how they were ranked.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no other feedback on that housing working group, then we have the MBTA community timeline.
Madam Chair, I'm standing in for Katie on that one. We're waiting on the DHCD final guidelines, so the deadline of remaining in interim compliance by submitting a determination or an action plan by December 31st it's going to be a struggle, I think. It's another, fast priority. You'll recall in our comments, we asked that that deadline be extended. So hopefully that will be considered by DHCD. I do note that decisions on how we're going to be in compliance with the DHCD, MBTA housing, and the housing working group are dovetailing into like the same month, but they are very separate discussions. And I think that we, as a board, assuming the December 31 deadline stays, we're going to have to spend some time, September and October, really talking about this, and perhaps asking the planning board to meet jointly to talk about how we might file a compliance letter. And then if we've asked again to be extended into December of 24, because meeting the zoning adoption by December of 23 is a real lift for us at this point. So there's a lot to be done. I think that there's a lot of strong interest in coming into compliance. And I think there's some, as you saw at the presentation, there's some interesting and creative ways that it can be done. It's not going to be, it's not an impossible task for us, but it's just make a lot of choices and a lot of conversation and a lot of feedback that has to get done between now and 6 months from now.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, have we heard, or do we know when we might hear back on whether or not we're going to be a bus versus commuter rail community? And then whether or not they'll accept some of our existing housing.
We haven't heard anything yet.
We haven't heard anything. Do we know? Have
Summer,
we heard when we might hear?
summer 2022.
Well, I understand that to be the final guidelines, but we have.
I think it's related. I think it's the same answer for everything. I could be wrong. So,
The
yeah,
longer it goes, I think the more likely we have to really strongly self-advocate. I mean, if, as we like to say, summer ends at the end of September. So if that's when we get these, I think that we need to call in people and have meetings. Which is what we do.
This is majority vote, right? The town meeting,
Uh,
because it's housing?
yeah.
Yeah, so.
and my
another-
sense from what I've read is that the nature of our comments are pretty sane, and that they probably regard that they have other communities who have much more aggressive comments in terms of not wishing to comply and not being on board for any of it. So I suspect we're like the small problem as opposed to one of the bigger problems. So we're probably lower on the list,
Sure.
but
But it represents like a massive change in our planning.
It-
So it's
Yes.
it
sure would be nice
does.
to know.
it does, but yeah.
It certainly can't hurt to ask if they have any deadline. We can do that.
So this will go to town meeting, or is there something for our little group here to
Well,
meet the
Yeah.
next steps?
it
for us as
depends
well?
on what comes back. But yes, it's likely that there'll be something that will ultimately go to town meeting. certainly for our interests in affordable housing, we're interested in what directions ultimately get taken. Then I would presume there will be something for town meeting, but it could be any of a variety of options, and so.
So we'll wait and see. All right.
All right, so we're in waiting and seeing mode and hoping for answers to our questions, and sooner would be better than later.
I'll use our resources.
Okay. All right, the housing choice grant application.
So, Madam Chair, we were working, one of the things that you can use the Housing Choice Grant Program for, it's essentially the one-stop grant, is to make infrastructure improvements that would help the development of housing. But the grant funding round is just too quick for us, so we'll consider it for next year. So it was due Friday. And we tried to shape anything that we were already doing into something that we could apply for, because we simply can't add anything just this week, and none of them really worked. So we'll keep it in our list of grants that we can apply for. I just wanted you to know that we did run just about everything in the DPW list up, but they weren't quite right. So.
Okay, all right. Any further matters for this committee? I'm not seeing anything. Then we usually set a next meeting date, or at least a target for one. Do you have a recommendation?
Well, December would make the most sense. On the other hand, if we were trying to do, maybe it depends on the release. Maybe what we do is as soon as we get the guidelines, that will remind me to set the meeting date, and then we can see whether we need to have a quicker meeting or whether we can keep our 6-month schedule. Does that make sense?
So the guidelines from
DHCD.
DHCD.
I think that would be the only thing that would need to accelerate this meeting. If the planning board brings its working group into your meeting, we can invite Avery.
Avery, right. That's what I was gonna say.
That'll
We
be
need to
good.
invite Avery to that
Yeah.
night.
10-minute walk.
Yeah. So that makes sense. And certainly triggering it based on DHCD makes sense, provided they come back. I guess I'd sort of like to say, if they don't come back, when are we meeting anyway? Because
December.
that could happen. So,
Yeah.
All right. And do we want to pick a possibility in December and just have a hold that may change? I know how quickly dates disappear these days.
My December's pretty wide open. I
How
don't know
about
about everyone
the, how about
else's.
the 6th?
Well, I was gonna say the 6th is our first meeting, so to meet at 5
Yeah.
before.
It's my
Right.
birthday, that's
I
perfect.
could do the 25th.
Cake, please, chocolate.
Okay, please, Trevor.
Avery,
And what kind of
your Tuesdays are
frosting?
good for you, right?
Chocolate's good.
Perfect.
All right, so 5 PM on the 6th to sing happy birthday to Matt.
There you go.
2 meetings in one like that, for just as a special.
You're right, yeah, it's just-
Okay. All right, good.
Okay.
If we have no further business, I welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Karen, good night, Lee.
Hi, Karen.
All right, thank you.